The notification sound on my phone used to be something I barely noticed. Background noise, light traffic outside, or the hum of the refrigerator. The night I told my family I'd lost everything, it became the most terrifying sound in the world. My name is Joanna. I'm 31. For the past 4 years, I've been quietly building something most people spend their entire careers chasing. A private wealth management firm, bootstrapped from a spare bedroom, 2 laptops, and an obsessive refusal to sleep more than 5 hours a night. Last spring, a larger firm acquired us for $8.5 million. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post anything. I called my attorney, Marcus Webb. No, wait, I need to tell you who came first. I called my grandmother. She picked up on the second ring, like she always does. I told her. She cried a little, then laughed, then said, I always knew you were the one who'd make something of herself. She didn't ask what I was going to do with the money. She didn't ask if she could visit my new place. She just said, I'm proud of you, baby. And then she told me to eat something because I always forget to eat when I'm stressed. That was the last normal phone call I had for a long time. 3 days later, my attorney, a methodical, quietly brilliant man named Marcus Webb, sat across from me in his office and said something that made no sense. I need you to call your mother tonight, he said, and I need you to tell her the deal fell through. I stared at him. Tell her the acquisition collapsed at the last minute. Tell her you lost the earnest payout, the bridge loan, everything. Tell her you're back to zero. Marcus. I set down my coffee. Why would I do that? He looked at me the way he always does when he's about to say something I don't want to hear. Steady, patient, no flinching. Because I've been reviewing the estate documents your grandmother asked me to prepare. And there are things happening around that estate that you don't know about yet. Things that concern your family. I need to see how they respond before we take the next step. I didn't ask more questions. I trusted him. I trusted him for 6 years. Ever since he helped me navigate a nightmare business dispute when I was 24 and had no idea what I was doing. If Marcus Webb told me to do something, there was always a reason. So that night, I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath my apartment building, and I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, which honestly should have told me something right there. My mother does not answer on the first ring. My mother calls you back an hour later and opens with, sorry, I was in the middle of something. Mom, I said, I need to tell you something. The deal fell through. Silence. The acquisition, it didn't close. There were issues with the valuation. The other firm pulled out. I lost the earnest deposit. I'm on the hook for the bridge loan. I had rehearsed this. It still felt like swallowing glass. I'm basically starting over. More silence. And then very carefully, my mother said, how much did you lose? Not are you okay? Not what happened. How much did you lose? I told her a number. A painful, specific number that Marcus and I had agreed on. Another beat of silence. Then, I see. Well, come home this weekend. We need to talk about some things. I sat in that parking garage for a long time after she hung up. Marcus called me at 11 that night, not to check on me emotionally, to tell me to watch my messages carefully over the next 24 hours and note who reached out, what they said, and in what order. Don't respond to anything without calling me first, he said. By midnight, I had 4 texts. My brother had sent, heard from Mom. That's rough. You should have listened when I told you this was too risky. No question mark? No, are you okay? Just a reminder that he'd apparently predicted my failure, a failure that hadn't actually happened. My aunt, my mother's sister, who I've spent maybe 12 collective hours with in the past decade, sent, honey, I'm so sorry. Family is everything. Money comes and goes. We love you no matter what. Sweet, right? Except she followed it 20 minutes later with, also. Have you thought about where you'll be staying? Your mother mentioned you might need to rethink your living situation. My cousin, who I genuinely like and who I hadn't spoken to in 3 months, sent a voice memo. 42 seconds. She sounded nervous. She said, hey, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I think you should call me before you go home this weekend. Like, privately. Don't mention I said this. Then she hung up. I called Marcus. Read him every message word for word. There was a pause on his end, and then he said, quietly, call your cousin back. My cousin picked up immediately. I could hear her breathing change, that particular shift when someone is trying to figure out if they're in a safe space to speak. Something's been going on, she said. With the family trust, your grandmother's trust. My mom mentioned something a few weeks ago, and then she told me to forget she said it. But then last month I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, and Joanna, I think your uncle has been talking to a property attorney. I felt cold. What kind of property attorney? I don't know exactly, but it was right after your grandmother had her health scare in February. Right after that, things started moving really fast. Documents being signed, meetings I wasn't told about, my grandmother's health scare. She'd been in the hospital for 4 days. A cardiac event, mild, thankfully. She'd come home, she was fine, she was back to herself. But apparently in those 4 days while I was flying home and sitting by her hospital bed, something had started somewhere in the background. I didn't sleep that night. The weekend arrived the way bad things always do. Too fast and completely on time. I drove to my parents' house with my phone on silent and Marcus's voice in my memory. Observe. Don't react. Whatever they say, whatever they show you, just listen. Your job this weekend is to collect information, not to defend yourself. The house looked exactly the same. That's the disorienting thing about going back to the place you grew up after something has irreversibly shifted. The porch swing is still there. The wind chimes my mother has had for 20 years are still hanging by the door. Everything looks identical while something inside it has quietly rotted. My mother met me at the door. She hugged me. A hug that was 1 second too brief. The kind that communicates obligation rather than warmth. My father was in the living room, standing near the fireplace, which he only does when he's trying to appear in control of a room. My brother was there. I hadn't known he was coming. He was sitting at the dining table with a yellow legal pad in front of him, which struck me immediately as theatrical. My brother is a high school gym teacher. He doesn't use legal pads. Sit down, sweetheart, my mother said. I sat. I kept my expression at something I practiced in the mirror at 6 that morning. Soft, a little sad, appropriately defeated. We've been talking, my father started, and given everything that's happened, given your situation, we think it makes sense to have a formal conversation about the family estate. The trust, my brother said, and my father shot him a look that told me they'd argued about how this was supposed to go. Your grandmother's trust, my father continued, has a structure that we've always intended to revisit at some point, and your grandmother herself, given her health, has expressed that she wants things settled. That was the first lie. I knew it was a lie because I had spoken to my grandmother 4 days ago and she had said, verbatim, I don't know what your uncle and your father are cooking up, but I want no part of it. She'd also told me to tell Marcus, which I already had. What kind of settled? I asked. I kept my voice level. My mother sat down across from me. She had a folder in her hands, a thin folder, blue, the kind from an office supply store. She set it on the table between us like it was something significant. We'd had some documents prepared, she said. Nothing complicated. Just a restructuring of the beneficiary designations. Given your circumstances right now, and given your grandmother's age, we think it's better to have things consolidated, simpler. I looked at the folder. I didn't touch it. Simpler? How? My father cleared his throat. Your grandmother's estate is structured in a way that's somewhat complicated. Multiple accounts, multiple trustees. We want to streamline it. Move primary trusteeship to someone who is stable, financially stable. Financially stable. Meaning, not me. My brother, apparently unable to stop himself, leaned forward. Look, you're in a bad place right now. We're not saying this to be cruel. But Grandma's trust has enough to make sure she's taken care of for the rest of her life, and there's still a significant amount remaining. It doesn't make sense for someone who just tanked their business to be in a position of financial oversight. I had not been in a position of financial oversight. I had not been named in any document they had apparently already prepared. So how had they known to prepare documents removing me from a position I didn't know I held? I kept my face still. Can I see the documents? I asked. My mother opened the folder. Inside were several pages, dense with legal language, my grandmother's name appearing repeatedly, and near the bottom of the first page, I found what Marcus had told me to look for. Primary beneficiary, revised. My name, crossed out in the revision history. My brother's name, inserted. I looked at the page for a long moment. I thought about my grandmother, 4 days in the hospital, the family swarming around her. I thought about the property attorney my cousin had overheard. I thought about my mother's first question when I called to say I'd lost everything. How much did you lose? Not how are you? How much? I'd like to have my attorney review this before I sign anything, I said. The temperature in the room dropped. My father said, carefully, that's not really necessary. This is a family matter. I know, but I'd feel more comfortable. My brother's patience, which had always been thin, snapped. You're being paranoid. This is exactly the problem with you, Joanna. You've always had to make everything difficult. Mom and Dad are trying to protect Grandma's assets from me? I asked. Still quiet. Still. From instability, my mother said quickly. That's all this is. My brother stood up. He walked to the window, which was his move when he needed to feel like he was controlling himself. If you don't sign this, it creates a legal problem. There's a clause in the existing trust about heirs who demonstrate financial irresponsibility. If that clause gets triggered, the whole estate goes into a contested probate situation and nobody gets anything easily, including Grandma's care costs. There it was. The threat wrapped in concern. Sign this, or we'll trigger a legal mechanism that hurts everyone, including the woman we're supposedly trying to protect. I stood up very slowly and said, I'm going to make a phone call. I stepped out onto the back porch. Marcus picked up before the first ring finished. I told him quietly and quickly everything I'd just heard. He said, Good. I'm 15 minutes away. Leave the back door unlocked. I went back inside. I sat back down. I told them I'd thought about it. I told them I understood their concerns. I watched my mother relax slightly, my brother uncross his arms. My father picked up his pen, and then the front door opened. Marcus Webb does not make dramatic entrances. He's 62, gray at the temples, and he wears the same kind of navy blazer in every season. He walked into my parents' living room like he'd been invited, nodded once at my father, and set his briefcase on the dining table next to my brother's theatrical legal pad. I apologize for the interruption, he said in the tone of someone who was not apologizing at all. Joanna asked me to join. I hope that's all right. My mother's face went through several things very quickly. Surprise, calculation, fear. This is a family meeting, my father said. Of course, Marcus said pleasantly. And Joanna is family, so her representation is entirely appropriate. He opened his briefcase. I've actually been wanting to have a conversation with all of you for some time now. Shall we? He didn't wait for an answer. From his briefcase, he removed a document that was considerably thicker than the blue folder on the table. He placed it in the center, facing my parents. The trust your mother established, he said, addressing my father, was reviewed by my office following her hospitalization in February. At her request, she contacted me directly. He let that sit for a moment. During that review, we identified several irregularities. Specifically, an attempt to file an amendment to the beneficiary structure that was not initiated or authorized by the trust's grantor. My father's pen had stopped moving. The amendment you're asking Joanna to sign today would, if executed, transfer primary trusteeship to her brother and reduce her beneficiary interest to 0. This document was prepared by an outside firm. Marcus looked up. A firm that was retained not by your mother, but by your brother-in-law, who was not named in the trust in any capacity. The silence was so complete I could hear the wind chimes on the front porch. Your mother, Marcus continued, is aware of this meeting. She is not, as was suggested to Joanna, requesting this restructuring. She has, in fact, provided my office with a signed and notarized statement to that effect, dated this past Thursday. He slid the document across the table. She also asked me to share something else. From a smaller envelope inside the briefcase, he removed a single folded page. He handed it to me, not to them. My grandmother's handwriting. Looping. A little shaky since the hospital, but unmistakably hers. Joanna. I knew this day would come. I told Marcus 20 years ago that I was worried about the way certain people in this family looked at what I built. I built it for you. Not because you need the money, I always knew you wouldn't, but because you're the only one of them who ever sat with me when I was lonely without needing something in return. The house in Asheville is yours. It has been in writing since 2019. They don't know about it. That's why I never mentioned it. Don't be angry at them. Just leave. I folded the letter. I put it in my jacket pocket. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. My brother had stood up. What house? What is she talking about? Marcus answered, your grandmother has maintained a separate property asset outside the trust structure for several years. It transferred to Joanna's name upon the completion of a specific legal benchmark, which occurred coincidentally the same week as Joanna's acquisition closed. He said it without any particular emphasis, but I felt the weight of it. My grandmother had tied the release of her gift to the moment she knew I'd be okay. That was so entirely her that I had to look at the ceiling for a second. That's not legal, my brother said, though he clearly had no idea whether it was or not. It is, in fact, entirely legal, Marcus said. I drafted it. My father set down his pen. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd sat down, and what I saw in his face wasn't anger, exactly. It was something older and smaller than anger. It was the look of someone who has been caught, and who knows it, and who is trying to decide whether to keep performing or to simply stop. He stopped. His shoulders dropped. Joanna, he said. And then he didn't say anything else. My mother pressed her fingers against her mouth. She looked at the table. My brother walked out of the room, and I heard the back door open and close. Marcus quietly gathered his documents. He didn't rush. He snapped his briefcase shut with the particular click that I'd come to associate, over 6 years, with things being resolved. He looked at me. The existing trust documents stand as originally written. I'll be in contact with the family's legal representative, whoever that turns out to be, to confirm there will be no further attempts to alter the structure without your grandmother's direct, witnessed authorization. He said it to the room, not to any one person. Is that understood? No one answered, which was an answer. I picked up my bag. I stood up. My mother said softly, Joanna, we were just trying to protect the family. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. I thought about the phone call where she asked how much did you lose before she asked if I was okay. I thought about 20 years of being told I was too ambitious, too serious, too difficult. I thought about my grandmother sitting alone in a hospital room, calling her attorney, quietly making sure that the one person who came to sit with her without an agenda would be taken care of. I know you believe that, I said. And I meant it. That might be the saddest part. But the thing about protection is that it usually involves asking the person whether they want to be protected. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The wind chimes moved. Behind me, my father said quietly, the acquisition really did close, didn't it? It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. Marcus was waiting by his car. The afternoon had gone gray while we were inside, the way late autumn does in the Northeast. Light there one moment, gone the next. There's one more thing, he said. Your grandmother asked me to give you this in person. He handed me a small key on a plain ring. No label. She says you'll know what it's for when you get to Asheville. I looked at the key. She also said, he added, with what I can only describe as the closest thing to a smile I've ever seen on Marcus Webb's face, to stop working so much and go see the mountains. I laughed. I actually laughed, standing in my parents' driveway, holding a key to a house I didn't know existed until 40 minutes ago, with $8.5 million in an account my family thought was empty. Some things land on you all at once. The grief and the relief and the exhaustion of having been underestimated by people who should have known better. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like finally being allowed to exhale. I drove to Asheville the next morning, 5.5 hours, windows down for the last 2, because the mountains in October are something I'd forgotten. The house was smaller than I'd imagined. White, set back from the road, a porch with 2 old rocking chairs and a view of the ridge that made me stand in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. On the kitchen table, there was an envelope. Sealed. My name in my grandmother's writing. Inside, a letter and a photograph. The photograph was of her and me, taken at her kitchen table when I was maybe 8 years old. I'm leaning against her shoulder. We're both looking at something off camera, both laughing. I don't remember what we were laughing at. I don't need to. The letter said, you never needed their permission to become who you are. You just needed time to figure that out. Welcome home, baby. The coffee maker is in the cabinet above the sink. It's the good kind. You deserve the good kind. I sat down at that kitchen table and I cried for a while. The specific kind of crying that isn't sadness exactly, but is the release of something that has been held too tight for too long. Then I found the coffee maker. It was indeed the good kind. I made a cup, took it out to the porch, and sat in one of the old rocking chairs, and looked at the ridge until the light changed. Marcus texted once, "Your grandmother says hello. She also says to call her when the coffee is done." I called her. She picked up on the second ring. "Did you find the rocking chairs?" she asked. "I'm sitting in one right now." "Good," she said. "The other one's for company, when you're ready for some." I told her I loved her. She told me she knew. And then she told me to eat something, because I always forget to eat when I'm stressed. Some things don't need to change. I've thought a lot about what I would have done if my cousin hadn't sent that voice memo. If she'd stayed quiet, the way people in families often do, out of habit, out of self-preservation, out of the fear that speaking up costs more than staying silent. I think about that a lot, because if she hadn't said anything, I might have walked into that living room completely unprepared. I might have signed something I couldn't undo. The thing about betrayal from people who are supposed to love you is that it doesn't arrive announcing itself. It arrives dressed as concern. It uses words like protecting and stability and what's best for everyone. It sits across from you with a blue folder and a rehearsed voice. And it trusts that you'll be too blindsided, too emotionally off balance to read the fine print. It counts on your shock to do half the work. What I keep coming back to is this. My grandmother saw it coming 20 years before I did. She sat quietly with that knowledge. Did it make a scene? Didn't confront anyone? Did it warm me in a way that would have poisoned my relationship with my family before I had the chance to understand it on my own? She just made a plan. She called Marcus. She put something in writing, signed it, dated it, locked it away. She trusted that when the moment arrived, I would be ready, and she made sure I had what I needed to handle it. That's not luck. That's a specific kind of intelligence that I think people underestimate because it doesn't make noise. It doesn't post about itself. It just works quietly for decades and then shows up exactly when it's needed. I used to think resilience was about surviving hard things, pushing through, not breaking. But watching Marcus walk into that living room with his briefcase and his navy blazer and his completely unrattled expression, and thinking about my grandmother in her kitchen in 2019, signing paperwork for a house she was giving to me, a house she never mentioned because she knew the wrong people might find out. I think resilience is actually something quieter than that. It's preparation. It's thinking 3 moves ahead, not out of paranoia but out of clarity. It's knowing who people are and making decisions accordingly, without drama, without confrontation, without giving them the chance to adjust their behavior before you've seen the truth of it. My father asked me on my way out the door whether the acquisition had really closed. He already knew the answer. What he was really asking was, "How long have you known?" And the honest answer is that I didn't, not fully until that weekend. But Marcus had known something was off for months, and my grandmother had known something was possible for decades. The people who protected me weren't the ones I was supposed to be able to count on. They were the ones who showed up anyway, one of them with a briefcase, one of them in a handwritten letter, one of them with a voice memo sent at 11 o'clock at night. I sat on that porch in Asheville for a long time. The mountains don't care what you've been through. They're just there, the same as they were before any of it happened. There's something steadying about that, not comfort exactly, but perspective. What I know now is that the people who actually love you don't wait to see if you're useful. They don't reappear when you have something to offer. They're the ones who answer on the second ring, who tell you to eat something, who put a key in an envelope and trust that you'll find your way to the door. The rest is just noise you eventually learn to stop listening for.